Building Committee Evaluation Criteria Subcommittee. It's Tuesday, March 31st, and this is a virtual meeting. So I am going to do a roll call attendance. I'm Maya Plotkin, and I am here. Ken Aries.
Here.
John Cummings. Oh, John, you're on mute. John, you're still on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you. No, I can't unmute. Oh, and John, it looks like you're also sharing your screen. Okay, we'll come back to John. Nancy Hyde.
Here.
Tony Mullen. Tony, you're on mute. Okay, so I need Tony to unmute for a present. Emily Parks.
Here.
All right, Tony and John, I need you guys to unmute.
Maya, I think that because John Chancharulo is sort of the owner of the meeting, I think he can
unmute?
Control that. Yeah.
I was just looking. I don't think that I can. I can mute, but I cannot unmute.
It might be for privacy.
Okay.
I do need a roll call. Oh,
Tony's here, sorry.
okay. Thank
It's
you.
different than Zoom, so I'm sorry.
And I still need John to unmute, but we have a quorum even if he doesn't unmute. So I'm going to text him.
There he is.
I see him.
John, say hi.
Can you not hear us?
He probably didn't do the audio part.
I just texted him.
Okay. I was going to do that.
Okay.
John is presenting, and that's the issue. So if he can hear us,
oh, he says I can't log on.
On the bottom right, it says stop sharing. We can see it on his computer. And if he clicks that, we'll be good to go.
You're actually, so he thinks he's not logged in. You're actually on the call.
So he needs to, hit that. And then at the bottom where it says stop sharing.
Oh, wait.
Whoa.
Because then we have that.
Oh, there he is. Okay, now unmute.
You won't believe what I have on my screen. I don't know if everybody else does, but it is.
Oh, he's got two
everybody.
things going. He's got two.
Oh.
Okay. All right. I think we're just going to move forward and we'll figure out John. I think he left. So we have a quorum. We'll move forward. So I'm recognizing that there's a live stream that's providing real-time public access to the activities of this subcommittee that is being broadcast on the Westwood School District's website. And I'm going to get into the subcommittee's chair report. So update on the process. So Doran Whittier submitted the PDP on our behalf to the MSBA last week. And the MSBA acknowledged receipt of that. The PDP, just as a refresher, includes both the education plan and also the short list of options. Oh, I think John's here now. John, can you say you're here for the roll call?
I am here for the roll call.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Okay. And so where we are now is we've got our short list of options, and the purpose of this subcommittee is to do a very similar process for the short list as what we did for the longer 15 list, which is first come up with evaluation criteria and approve the criteria and approve the matrix that reflects that criteria, and then apply the criteria to each of the 7 options that we have on our short list, and make a recommendation to the school building committee with respect to the results of that criteria. So that is an update on the project or the process. Are there any questions? No? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Rob from Doran Whittier Dorn, Whittier, and Compass have worked together to come up with criteria for this portion for the shortlist. It's going to look similar to the criteria we used for the longer list, but we're doing a deeper dive. It's going to be more extensive, and there are a couple new things in them. So, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you should see a matrix, which is shows the short list of options.
A lot easier to look at when it's a shorter list.
Yeah.
I know.
Right. Right. So I've hidden the columns of all the options that have been eliminated. So this is kind of our starting point, this phase. And so what we've done with Compass is we took this initial list. These were the criteria and the questions that were used during the PDP phase, and we kind of expanded that a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to review today. So if we go to the next slide, so this these are the options across the top, and then these are the criteria along the left side. And what we've done is kind of created a number of additional questions that might come into play during this phase as we narrow down from this large group of options down to one, which is the goal for the end of this phase, is to end up with one option. And so how do we get there? Well, we looked at defining a number of questions, which I believe were sent out to the evaluation committee last week. Is that right?
Yep.
So, so we took those questions and then kind of summarized them into, I guess, subcategories. So here on the left, we've got educational guidelines, growth and future, outdoor learning in connection to nature, impact other schools. Then under site, there's circulation and parking, fields and other amenities. Under town impact, redistricting and traffic, community use opportunities, potential growth and other town needs. And then security, sustainability, and construction impact, logistics, and then cost. What's the cost to benefit analysis, the net cost of the town for all three schools, thinking of the big picture, and then busing and operational costs. So this is a first blush attempt at presenting something to you guys, and today we are looking to get some feedback. And I'm going to go over each of the individual questions in a minute, but the number one question is, are we missing anything? Is there anything here that that we didn't include that should be included, that should be considered? And so when we break this down further, we've got a number of questions, and so the idea is we want to be inclusive of all of the issues, but at the same time, we'd like to make it as simple and distill it down to the simplest form if possible, because there are a lot of questions and there are a lot of options to go through. So when we go through some of this, you might find, or you might be wondering if any of these can be either combined into other questions or maybe eliminated. So I don't know if anyone has had a chance to had any thoughts and initial thoughts on, I guess before I jump into this, any initial thoughts on the questions we sent out?
Are you asking specific to the educational guidelines at this point, or big picture questions overall?
It could be any of them. I'm going to walk through all of them, but
Okay, I'll wait as you walk through.
Okay, yeah, feel free, anybody, I guess, that wants to jump in at any time, feel free to speak up.
So the educational guidelines, the only thing I see here is we have under education, buildings zoned into public and private sections. And I know we were also talking about that in terms of community because we was,
Right.
you know, in the context that we were thinking it's an advantage for the community to have those sections. So I'm just wondering, do we want to leave it in both places? Do we want to remove it from education? I'm just not sure it's part of the education piece necessarily. Certainly it's helpful for educators to be able to know that their rooms will be in sort of lockdown during public events or however you want to put it. But I just don't know if it belongs here. And I'm a little hesitant to count it twice.
Sure.
I agree, Mia.
Yeah, that's fine. We can make that adjustment. You know, and these sub bullets were, you know, taken from the kind of the guiding principles.
Yep.
So that's why they all kind of appeared on this list, but we can certainly move that.
I think there's a similar issue with it's under educational guidelines. How well does the alternative retain the small school feel? Maybe it's not similar because I know what we mean by the discussions we've had all along the way about the small school feel. But if somebody were to pick up this document and understand it, I don't think that question in and of itself is clear. Somebody may look at the building when it's all said and done and say, how did this look like a small school? So I think we have to be a little more specific. And if it's going to standard educational guidelines, what does that mean to have a small school feel? Is, you know, building small communities where there can be interfacing of students in the same grade at different classrooms. So I think we have to make that a little clearer.
We almost could take that first guideline under the question with the small grade level neighborhood learning communities and work that question
Under it.
Yeah, guiding principle.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. And then the other one that I highlighted in red here was wondering if this is really important enough to include, you know, or whether this can be kind of integrated into other thoughts, you know.
I would say, Rob, that I think that is an important question.
Okay.
I do think that some of the sort of sub-criteria that you've listed here goes to answering that question.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know, so we've got sufficient professional space, which is certainly part of it, but I think part of what we'd be assessing there is, and the location of that space. Right, sort of, that's the design piece of it, but I do think that's an important question.
Okay.
Emily, just to follow up on that a little bit, in terms of some of the distinction, that one of the issue that you need to, Rob, can you scroll down just scroll so that we show all the options at the top for the moment? One of the things that we need to do here is also need to be able to, for instance, one of the most difficult ones is that between the tree and backward E, those two options are effectively the same everywhere else for vast majority of the questions and criteria. We also need to have sufficient amount of criteria. We also need to at least have one criteria that allow you to make the distinction between the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
So
I think
think about that in a way, sort of like we want to ask all the right questions, but also we also want to ask questions in a way that allow us to arrive at one option at the end of the day.
I agree. I mean,
Go ahead, Emily.
well, I'm just thinking that you know, when the group of principals have been looking at those designs, there's complete consensus that they prefer one over the other. And I think that what you're getting at, Jin, is we maybe need to dig down and think about why that is.
Yes,
that probably goes to something that's important to them that should be part
it's
of the
probably somewhere in the education part.
Yeah, I
right?
think it is. Yeah.
And so if you could try to tease that out of it so that we can put it in there.
Yes.
And to your point, I went back when we were adding to these criteria, I went back and read the notes that Emily provided us that the principals gave in response to the comparison of the two plans. And so these guidelines or these guiding principles were the ones that I pulled out that most closely related to the things that they did bring up, knowing that these would help us differentiate between those two plans.
Yeah. I think there was something else in there. I mean, I think it's a proximity issue, but I'm looking classrooms grouped in proximity, that's sort of in proximity to each other. But as I recall, when sort of making the distinction between the two, it also had to do with proximity for any given grade level neighborhood to the public space. So I'm not sure how.
And to specials and to special
Right.
ed, right, to minimize the travel time. Yep.
Yes, they talked about travel time. Exactly.
Yep.
So I don't know how to capture that idea, but that does seem important to do.
Can Dawn Whittier make an attempt to, do we need to pull one more subcategory out of this under education, or is it okay to the short, Rob, can you show the shorter list? Go to the summary, I think. But without So right now that this is sort of at the end of the day, some format of this nature will be easier for people to take so do we need to add something in there in under education to capture that issue?
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like, I mean, I'm thinking about this right now, but it's almost like we've got sort of education in the sense of something that has to do with teaching and learning, and then education that has something to do with the culture of the building, which maybe is that small school feel.
So it's like how the organization of the inside of the building supports teaching and learning and how it supports community.
Yeah. And that could be, I mean, community or culture, and that could be both student and professional.
Yeah, I mean,
culture.
if we add under educational guidelines, we could have, instead of having it all under one, you can split out educational guidelines into two.
Right.
So we have educational learning guidelines and educational, I don't know, community guidelines or something like that. So we've got two distinct categories, and then just go through this list and sort of pull out what should be in each one.
Yeah.
I like the word culture.
Yeah, me too.
I think that it's very suitable under the education because so much else things will get covered in other categories, but this is such a pivotal overall category to any decision making that we have.
Well,
and there's a lot grouped into this one educational guidelines section. I think it makes sense for us to pull it out and make it into two.
Yeah.
Because we really want to capture this.
Okay,
Right.
we can do that.
And Rob, just a clerical thing. I noticed that the options that are moving forward in the list that we provided in the PDP, it's NHS H1. It's the 685 of the tree, not the backwards E.
This one here.
Right. The tree.
Yeah.
No, 12.
12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just changed it to a 1.
And then I think just in the informal name, it should say tree.
Option.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
Right.
There we go.
And then it's option 11, not 12.
You guys are here. Okay.
Okay, great.
So going down to growth and future, how does the building organization support potential future growth, building expansion, and/or the changes in student educational delivery models? So that's its own kind of question and own category right now. And then how well does the building support outdoor learning opportunities? I'm not sure how much difference there will be between each of the options, but there could be some difference between
Or
some options.
there will be difference between the Hanlon versus the Deerfield, the Sheehan site.
Right.
But is that its own category or is that under education?
It's a sub question under education.
Okay,
So
thank
right
you.
now,
I lost that. Okay, thank you.
So what we've done is
Perfect.
we've created this sort of weight multiplier. And so
Yeah.
as we go through these, these are
Got
just numbers that we plugged in here and just used round, either 5 or 10 just as a just to keep it simple. But you guys can modify these as needed. I just had that all the numbers add up to 100. And so as we go through, or even after, even as we go through and after we finish this, if you guys decide you want to change some of these, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
This is a way to say that, to allow you to say, okay, just for argument's sake, redistricting is, the impact of redistricting is really important. So therefore, we need to put more weight on that, even though it's a single item, that you could put more weight on it. And education obviously is more important. But then how much does that, how do you balance the different issues, and then so that you can put more weight on the more important issues?
They can show you how that gets applied in the example, but it might be good just to focus on these criteria right now.
Yeah.
And then get into the discussion on weighting.
Yeah. So on the site, we've got circulation and parking. So underneath that is, proximity of parking to the main entrance. How does the site support appropriate number of parking spaces, or does the site support appropriate number of parking spaces? Safe, clear, and easily understood circulation route, separation of bus, car, and pedestrians, adequate queuing space, safe access into and out of the site. Then under fields and other amenities, access to play fields, playground, and outdoor learning, scale of building to the site, does the building size proportionate to the site it sits on? I don't know, everyone feel comfortable with these questions, or?
Yeah, I think that looks good.
Okay. Under town impact, so we kind of tossed around back and forth whether it made sense to keep the same headings like we did in the PDP. So for example, we had traffic as a primary heading before, and now we've made it as a subset to town impact. So I'll walk through these and we can talk about it. So this one is redistricting and traffic. What's the impact of the traffic on the neighborhood and the town? Walkability. What is the impact on overall net increase in cars versus walkers? What are the redistricting impacts on students and families? Busing, considering travel time, number of students impacted. And then community use opportunities. What are the opportunities and constraints to the town from both the project and remaining properties? And to what extent does the alternative provide benefits to the community, such as sports fields, community space, and gym space? And then potential growth or other town needs. What is the impact of the town on potential growth and or future town needs? And I think this kind of talks about, if you look at the bigger picture, what happens to the other sites, and is there potential for, I guess, has it been thought out about what happens to the other sites under each scenario? but I'm wondering, I don't know, I guess so. The question is this something that should be integrated into something else? Should the traffic be its own and community be its own, so it matches the PDP? The questions.
Rob, my question would be, potential growth or other town needs. So I certainly agree that there should be something that allows us to say, I mean, this is the issue of, the building that's no longer needed, right? And does it have any value to the community? I think potential growth is going to be confusing as a
I
term,
agree.
because it looks like we're trying to assess that, like that's what we're going for in some way, some kind of, growth or development, which is not the case, I don't believe. So I think I would suggest changing it, or maybe even just truncating it, other town needs. I don't know, Nancy, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going there too, but I think it's something a little bit better than other town needs, but
Okay.
I think we have to be clearer. So we have to be clearer that it's the building that potentially is vacated. Something
Yeah.
has to be clear on that. And then it's sort of usefulness or repurpose,
Yeah. Potential use of,
potential reuse.
reuse of, of whatever it would be, I'm
of
not sure what the adjective is.
Vacated school.
Vacated, yeah.
But are we in a position to make, I mean, that's not,
We aren't
we
making that
can,
decision
right,
yet.
like we can guess, right? We can
Right.
say, well, the town will probably want this to do this and would want, but I mean, like for
Yeah, that might
Shield,
not belong here at all.
yeah, I mean, I just think that, I just don't know how we would evaluate that, especially like if we're talking about, let's say Sheehan, for example. I have no idea what the town will do with Sheehan.
Well, that's the whole thing. Tim, you might want to weigh in because we're supposed to, at some point in the near term, formulate a committee that will be separate from the school building committee
Right,
to look at the remaining building.
right.
So,
And so,
yeah, maybe we just remove it from here. But just, sort of
Just
shake
shade
it
it.
out. And when we're going through the options, we'll see if there's any beneficial discussion at this point. But I think it's intended to come after we decide which option is the preferred option.
yeah, I just think this is almost, I don't think it's the call of the SBC, and B, I just think it's also something that we can't decide now. I mean,
You wouldn't use that to decide which is the best option.
right.
Right.
It's the result of deciding the best option.
Right.
Mhm. Okay.
And I mean, Rob and Chin and Tim, and to what extent does this have to align with the PDP? I mean, we can,
Well, it doesn't need to.
it doesn't need to, right? Okay, so
This is for you to dive into more detail to make decisions. So it does not need to align, and the reason for aligning would be more like making it easier for people to digest and understand.
yeah. I mean,
So-
I would say that this category, I don't think we should have this category.
So it's almost as if everything else was equal, then this might be an interesting thing to look at in the end. But what we're suggesting is we've got to first evaluate each of these options sort of on the merits in terms of
Everything
these other
else.
criteria first.
I
Okay,
think that's well
so I
put
would
in,
agree.
because if it comes down to if everything else is equal and you're choosing between what the remaining property might mean for the town, then yes, there might be a preference, but you wouldn't have this overall. Yeah,
May I suggest that we temporarily hide this one and then only bring it in if we need it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still confused onto how we would be able to evaluate this
I
question.
think my sense is it's unlikely we are going to need it. I mean, I think we have so much going on here that we're going to be
Yeah.
seeing some clear
Okay.
answers.
Yeah, because the one thing that you need to think about and I agree with all these comments, is that eventually you're going to, and I thought it came off really well when you did it for the PDP and getting to this short list, but you have to say, okay, why did you give something a 5 versus a 4 or a 3? And this one would be hard to make those particularly, I think, hard to sort of have that almost objective scale to be able to
Right.
tell people.
Right.
But you know, really in all these, you need to think about that. How do you, at what sort of way do you measure things against these different criteria?
Right.
So in going up a couple of questions under this community use and opportunities, this question where it says, what are the opportunities and constraints to the town for both the project and remaining properties? I think this is meant to address the question on the field's use. So if one option, for example, was built on, let's say, the Sheehan site where it's sitting directly on top of community fields, then what happens to those fields, on other properties, or where do those other fields get placed, or
So
that sort of.
yeah, I think that first, what are the opportunities and constraints? I almost think it should just say, what are the constraints? Because the second question says, to what extent does the alternative provide benefits to the community? So I'm not sure the difference between opportunities and benefits. So if we say, if the first question is, to what extent does the alternative provide benefits to the community, like sports fields, community space, and the second question is, what are the constraints to the town from the project and the remaining properties? That makes a little more sense to me, because the first one we're looking at, the good, the second one is the bad.
Okay.
And then I think also in this section is where we get into the public versus private question.
Okay, move that down here.
Yeah, unless people disagree and think it should go somewhere else.
No, I agree. I just think it should be a separate question, because one of the challenges was in the PDP when I was writing about how we evaluated the options, we were putting it in as a benefit to the community, but really it's kind of a separate thing, because it's also a focus on the kids and safety inside the building. So as long as it's a separate question under there.
Yeah, it should be separate. So there'd be 3 questions under there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Make a note here. So should this still be titled town impact, or should we separate these two?
I
Any
think
thoughts?
so.
I think it's,
Should we leave this as town impact, or should we separate these as 2 separate categories?
I think they still go together.
Yeah, I mean, community use is town impact, unless we change it to community impact.
Community impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would do that, community impact.
My only question on the redistricting and traffic, is there anything on redistricting that might be independent of traffic, I guess is a question. In other words, could you say there's, I don't know, it's just a question. I'm not saying we should separate it.
I think that's,
There
Yeah.
will be there will be issues that is in the redistricting that is not traffic related, which is the distribution and the of your school building within the town, and also the district map. What does it look like, and how well does it balance or not balance?
Got it.
So yeah, so
where is that captured? I feel like I read that on the draft, but I don't see it
How
here.
does
So
the design enrollment impact the size of remaining schools relative to grade level structuring and
Yeah,
educational
that-
delivery?
No, the thing about travel time and whatnot.
Travel time, I think, is under. It's somewhere.
it's under redistricting,
Yeah.
isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
right there under community impact.
It's funny because some of these traffic questions belong under redistricting, but there's other questions, to Tony's point, about redistricting that aren't related to traffic. So do we have a redistricting section and a traffic section, or do we just have redistricting and just have some traffic questions and some education questions?
Yeah, that's the way it
Yeah.
is set up right now. They're kind of combined into this one thing.
Yeah.
But we can reorganize it.
I mean,
Yeah,
it
I mean,
seems to me redistricting is so going to be its own little factor.
right.
And to that point, and this is sort of my email last night to you guys where I said, where's the redistricting? I know we're waiting it, but I felt like it got a little, like, to me, that's a big thing that we need
Yeah,
to look
right.
at. And it got a little lost because it's under community impact. I don't know if it should be its own category. And if, you know, if we have it sort of along the side, then we can have like a traffic section for redistricting, and we can have a, you know, education piece for redistricting, sort of the administration piece of redistricting. And then there may also still be traffic
category.
issues under community.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering why, I mean, we have community impact here. I see redistricting and traffic, and I know we're not getting into the weighting, but, you know, right now it is 10 points, which I think reflects the fact that it's really two different categories glommed into one. Could we just have redistricting as one line, you know, with 5 points, and then traffic as another line with 5 points? I do think redistricting, I mean, that does feel appropriate to me under community impact, because it does have something to do with, I mean, but I'm thinking, you know, for instance, if we redistricted to the Sheehan site, you effectively are taking all of the families who are now affiliated with Hanlon and kind of redistributing them to 3 different schools. That does feel like a community impact to me. Not sure how to capture, I mean, that's also sort of about culture.
Right, and that's kind of this third question here. What are the redistricting impacts on students and families? Busing, travel time, number of students impacted.
Right.
I think we need to flush out redistricting more, because there are things in here like, you know, Chin gave the example of what does the redistricting map look like after, right? And how easy is that to administer? And I would think from an administrative perspective, trying to administer a district map that looks very heavily weighted to one side of the town, yeah, that will have a community impact, but that's also difficult as an administrator. Right?
It's a transportation impact, which, you know, isn't necessarily the same thing as traffic. Yeah, it has to do with, it has to do with other things. So time on buses, cost of transportation.
And that is in terms of the busing, the cost of buses and such is at the moment that there is a line item on operational cost in terms of the actual dollars in there.
Okay.
So
that might be there.
And I understand that there are different ways to do this. And then this is why we're doing this right now, to try to figure out what the best way to do it. And I think we have to defer to Emily in terms of what is the proper way to talk about the redistricting impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
In some way that at the end of the day, you're going to have to be out there presenting this to the community.
Yeah.
So,
well, it may be that after we have the presentation by the redistricting consultant next Tuesday, we have a better sense of how to frame that issue.
Yeah, I think redistricting and traffic should be separated, and redistricting may end up looking like the educational program or whatever we had up top, where there were lots of sort of subcategories. But I don't think that, like that last sentence, what are the redistricting impacts on students and families, busing, travel time? That's a lot in that one sentence. Yeah. And I just think this needs to be unpacked a little bit more.
Okay. do we want to, do you guys want to take a closer look at that and then give some advice on, what your thoughts are and what this looks like?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else on the community impact category? Okay, so then this category, couldn't come up with a name of it because it's just kind of like three separate things. So it's security, sustainability, construction impact. So under security, how well does the building support a clear separation of public and private zones? How well does it support a controlled and limited public area for after hours use? How well does the front door administration support a direct sight line to parking and site entry? So this first question kind of falls under that public-private zone again as well. And so, maybe that's redundant. Maybe this is the place where it needs to be. Open to hearing what your thoughts are on whether it makes sense to keep it here or not. How well does the front door administration support a direct sideline to parking and the site entry? Is that I guess important enough to include it? Is this whole security line item, I guess, important enough to include as a separate thing, or should these be consolidated?
So Rob, we took the public-private out of the education category, right? Did we decide to move that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this does feel like the more appropriate place for me.
Yeah.
That issue.
Me too.
Yeah.
I wonder on the second question is a very specific subset, but maybe there's just a broad question around, does the building fulfill, I don't know, best practice in security or whatever, because that's just a very specific question.
You mean the front door? What question?
The front door question. But there's probably another 100 things a new building will be better at in security than just the front door. I just wonder if you make that broader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. So for instance, would it be safe to say that a brand new building would be possible to build in security features that maybe aren't possible in some of the renovation options?
No, I mean, I think any of the options would integrate, the latest
current best
features
practices.
Yeah. I mean, we would design entrances for a renovated building the same as we would for new construction. I think it's really the biggest differences are on the approach to the building, for example, and getting from the arrival and into the building. Is it clear where the entrance is, or are people trying to get into another entrance maybe that isn't situated properly? But
so maybe that's why we have this question here, as you explain it, that sort of all of those other security features that I think what we're suggesting would be an enhancement for any one of these options compared to what we currently have, but that the orientation on the site and sort of how it's the entrance relates to the parking, that would be the point of distinction among these different choices that we have. Yeah. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hey Rob,
sorry, John. In all the new builds, wouldn't they all have the same answer? I mean, if we're building from scratch, is that what you were going to say, John?
Yes, ma'am.
I
know Rob's good enough to make sure that we could, all the security that he could design into all the buildings.
It's in all of the designs, right?
I think that this issue of sort of how the front door is oriented with respect to parking, I mean, that's different in different options, right?
It could be slightly different, depending on how the site is configured and the building configuration.
Or how close to the street something is, right? I mean, that's a consideration now when thinking about security of schools. Like, how long is the approach? Sort of, are there other you know, opportunities to thwart things.
To
Right,
respond to this is that I think in some way that the security and sustainability in terms of in these two categories, all the new building will essentially get the same score, more or less. And the reason that to put them on there, even though they're going to score all the same, is basically to say that, well, we are actually thinking, I mean, we didn't just simply, we're thinking about all the issues for the project, and then these ones are happen to be, there won't be that much of a delta among the shortlisted options.
Okay. It's a way of indicating we thought about it.
Yeah,
I
because
agree. That's what I was thinking too. That
Okay.
you need to have it there because you know it's an important element of the building project, whatever it becomes. But it's not that you're going to have a lot of distinction amongst these options.
Mhm.
It's just an important element.
Mhm.
And there may be a way to reword that second question to make it a little bit more general, you know, and not so specific, so it kind of allows for broader thinking around that.
Yeah.
Okay, sustainability. How well does the building and site support the district and town sustainability goals? How well does the building organization position on the site support academic classrooms with the north-south solar orientation?
Just an update on the town sustainability goals. I think, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think FinCom recommended indefinite postponement on that amendment bill. Is that right?
I think so. Nancy
It's
might
not
know.
an amendment. It was a non-binding.
Right, sorry,
resolution.
the non-binding resolution about.
Yeah, which that's just their recommendation. So we'll see what town meeting does. But the conversation was, do we really need to be doing non-binding resolutions through the town meeting process? Not, I wouldn't say it's lack of support of sustainability goals. Some people might have differed on net zero as being what they think should be the primary goal. So, and it was a sort of nebulous discussion, and a lot of the FinCom members just didn't think it should be going to town meeting. So we'll have to, if it doesn't pass town meeting, we'll have to figure out another way to reflect what we aspire to in the town.
So the timing will be tricky though, because town meeting is now June 8, right?
I wouldn't worry about that at all. I wouldn't worry about the timing. I wouldn't worry about whether or not it passes. I think we've just got to focus on, do we want to build in sustainability features to this building and aspire to something that makes it a better building from a cost savings and from an environmental impact.
Okay.
We're probably going to come up short through the town meeting process on the article. I mean, that's likely, but we'll see. We don't even know how big town meeting's going to be, so it's hard to know if we're going to have an open town meeting in the traditional sense that anybody can come who wants to. We might have limitations on the number of people who can come, so that might not even be a great way to find out what the town thinks about it.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem is at this point, it's the only way to find out what the town thinks about it, right? We don't have any.
Did like a survey monkey or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's only as good as the people who take it. And the people who take it are usually the ones motivated to take it.
Right.
Or as good as, yeah, and it requires a lot of education beforehand. So I don't know.
This is
Anyway.
This is well, and trying to answer this question that is like, how well does it support the town's sustainability goals, is hard to do if we don't know what those goals are.
So you might want to rephrase the question in light of the circumstances.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Are the
Yeah,
selectmen picking up this issue at
How
all?
does the building achieve sustainability elements or something like that? I.e. carbon footprint or net zero energy. Just how does the building achieve different
Okay.
sustainability elements? I said it already.
Yeah, I agree with that. That sounds good. And to Chin's point, these are probably all going to wind up pretty similar for the new builds anyway. So,
Right.
okay. We should probably keep going. I'm conscious of time here.
Yep. So what is impact to students, parents, and faculty during construction? How difficult is the phasing and site logistics? It's pretty straightforward.
Do we want to talk at all? I don't even know if we want to go there, but talk about the impact to neighborhoods in construction, to adjacent neighbors, or?
Sure.
I'm just thinking the Sheehan site, you know, you're building much closer to houses than you are on the Deerfield site.
Hanlon site.
Sorry.
Just don't want anyone in the public
know.
to get alarmed.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna get another article.
Well, and
Hanlon's off the table.
no. Also, with sites, it will impact where you can displace parking to. So I do think there are consequences depending on which site that are going to push parking or other impacts into the neighborhoods. So I think there will be a difference when we evaluate them, the options.
Yeah.
Is that an additional question, or is that tied into the impact
Tied
of the
in.
neighbors?
I think it's tied in.
It's tied into the site logistics, I think.
Yes, I just didn't know if that was an additional
So add
question.
neighborhood. Add neighborhood. What is the impact to students, parents, faculty, neighborhood during construction?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, your note does it.
Okay. Going down into cost. So this would be a cost and benefit analysis. How well does the option compare in cost to the benefit that you're receiving from, you know, that value? Which option has the most benefits financially and educationally and fits into the neighborhood? How does this option compare relative to the potential problems, risks, complications of the option?
How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
How are we gonna evaluate this one?
What was your thinking around that, Rob, in terms of how you would mechanically fill in a grade for those?
That's objective and not subjective.
Well, I mean, the first question is, you know, you can look, I think we can answer the first question, the cost benefit analysis, right? You can look and see, okay, we're spending $60 million and or $30 million, $40 million, and all we're doing is getting exactly the same building.
Oh, you mean as it relates to the code repair? Yeah.
Right. As opposed to spending, you know,
pretty similar, right?
I think that the others are a little bit more complicated.
Right.
We almost answer pieces of those though in other categories, like the benefits educationally. There's a whole
Right.
section just on those.
Right. That's what I mean.
It's almost redundant.
Yeah.
Yep. Even the Hanlon renovation would be captured elsewhere.
I mean, in essence,
Any
that's what we're doing
educational
with the whole exercise is a cost benefit, you know, analysis. Mike's point.
I think the idea was this was specifically looking at costs. So, I mean, where someone might say, well, that ad reno costs a little bit more than the new. So, you know, the benefit is, you know, the cost of benefit analysis shows that the newer makes more sense. That's just an example. But maybe there's something else that says, you know, if we renovate the building, you know, we are saving the existing, you know, structure and we're reusing the building. You know, there may be some other benefits, you know, to that, even though it's a higher cost.
It is one of the first questions people ask, so it might be nice to have it on the paper. You can show them that how we've dealt with it.
Yeah, I agree. I go with John. So it needs to be somewhere. And I guess my other observation, not to bring the world affairs into this, but and these questions may not get it, and this may be more a full committee discussion around like the world's changed obviously in the last 30 days. Like I just think like 6 classrooms versus 5 versus 4. There are things that if you look at the overall cost that could actually be meaningful. And that may be a broader conversation, but I think we just need to at least among ourselves flag that. How do we keep, you know, I think how do we make this as cost effective as possible while achieving everything else?
And if there's, I mean, if there's some rewording that people would like me to have or to modify in here, happy to do that. Just thinking that we didn't want to have, just cost. Okay, what's the overall cost? Okay, without looking at anything else. Oh, well, if we're just looking at cost only, then that should get a higher number than this other one. But I think it's more than that, right? It's looking at, it's kind of like weighing, okay, how much does it cost in relation to actually what I'm getting out of it?
So maybe we
So-
leave this general, right? And we just leave the first question. And we can sort of flush out in our discussions what the cost benefit analysis looks like.
Okay.
But I agree that we need the question.
We need a question about cost, and then does it make sense to talk more about what is the total cost of the to address all three buildings at the currently how the second question that we have, is that the better way to address the cost? Because if you only look at the project cost, the Hanlon only will be the $60 million option. That will be much less than the Hanlon Deerfield at 560. But then you would have substantially more issue, but you then left with two buildings and population that you had to service. And so in some ways that's the wrong way to look at it.
Well, but is it? I mean, you think about it, if you say that's the better cost, but so many other things in other categories are going to speak to it not providing the best educational impacts. So in fact, it's the cheaper cost and that gets a better mark, but it's going to be lower graded in a lot of other areas. So it will take care of itself.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's a low, what did you, oh, you have 10 on it. Maybe it shouldn't have a 10. Maybe it's a 5 in that regard. And you reallocate 5 points somewhere else.
You want me to leave this first, the cost benefit one, for you guys to, I guess, mull over a little bit further and.
Yeah, you need to think about how you'd measure it eventually. You need to think about exactly what's the measurement you'd bring to it to be able to come up with a number.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. I think Mike's original comment was pretty right. There should be something about cost, but isn't the benefit and sort of what you get for that cost all dealt with above that and all the other
So why isn't it just cost? Why don't you evaluate just cost?
Well, that's what this second one is sort of, but that's with all three schools.
No, but I'm talking about just the project itself, and then you have net cost for all three schools as a separate one.
Yeah.
So you have a category to simply the project cost as the first one.
Right.
So the cheapest project gets the highest score?
In that line.
It's in that category.
And it should be weighted.
You can weight it differently.
Right. Yeah.
But you're still saying to keep a cost to benefit line item, right?
Well, I think what Nancy was saying is that the benefit aspect is already covered in other categories. That
right. But I think what's interesting about that is, I think there's two things we're talking about. We're talking about like the wording and the semantics of the evaluation criteria, but then there's the description of it. When you read through the description later on of how we evaluated the options, because you can say, this is the cost of this alternative. However, in comparison to all of the benefits that, we've discussed and we've identified in all these other options, it kind of balances each other out. So I feel like we have to leave the opportunity to talk about it somehow. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, if we had it in, just spitballing, but if it says benefit analysis, return on investment, then you can actually look at the positive and negatives of doing one school versus the other.
Mhm.
So it's not just a cost analysis, it's what's the return on the investment for the town. Yeah, all right, so we renoed the Hanlon cheaper, but you still have two schools that need it. If we combine the two schools, this is the cheapest evaluation or the best return on investment because you're able to put two schools together, use the second school, the first school for town fields, so the return on investment would be this. I don't know, just spitballing.
How about I'll table this and you guys have a little time to think it over, and then you put this into the other category.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
You're also looking at redistricting, right? So
Yep.
maybe just take a look at this one and see what you think.
Okay.
The net cost to town for all three schools. So that's, looking at the bigger picture. And then busing and operational costs, overall transportation and operating cost impact to the district, both for the project and schools.
Emily,
Mhm.
the busing and operational costs, that's something that you feel comfortable that you can come up with a way to analyze that from Lemma can run some models on that, right?
Yes, I think she can. She's
Because we need to do that if that's the way that we want to state it.
Well, she can certainly run models on the busing, the transportation costs. That we can do. The operational costs, I mean, I probably would want to talk to Jordan Whittier a bit about that. Well,
Okay.
In terms of, from your perspective, are you thinking that staffing wise?
staff. Well, that we can do. Yeah.
Okay, staffing wise, you can do, and then you can do the busing costs, and then so the only thing that is not in there is the maintenance costs, which we
Exactly.
Dwayne Whittier can help to get some information, and then with Ken's help, we can come up with something and we add them together. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We have to fill out a whole thing around that for anyways, independent of this. So that'll almost fill that in.
Okay,
Mhm.
great.
The whole capital budget. There's a whole statement around pre and post costs.
All right. So can anybody think of anything that we might have missed that we haven't covered yet?
I think it looks good.
Okay. So the example this was just an example, of just to see, what it would, so you would multiply the weight, times, let's say you would give a score like similar to what we did before of 1 through 5 for each question, for each sub question, I should say. And then you multiply that out to come up with a score. This is just a sample, just throwing numbers in here. But then you would total, each of the different categories, and then to arrive at a total number at the bottom. So 500 would be, a perfect score, for example, since we're going 1 through 5. And so then you'd be able to compare, the total score at the bottom that way. How does this look to you guys?
Yeah, I don't think we should frame it as 500 being a perfect score because nothing's going to be perfect. And I
Right.
would just say, like we did with when we had all the options, we just looked at the score and compared it relative to the others. So whatever was, whatever's at, let's say 350, it might be the highest score and the other ones are all lower than that. I don't want it to be compared 350 to 500 as it's short of being really what we want by 150 points.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just would take that out of this analysis.
Okay.
Just the 500 is the highest score is the highest score is the strongest option. It would be coming out of this. So just take that reference of 500 out.
Okay. Does this process and approach look good to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At
Is
the
it
end of the
possible?
day, if we come out with, a clarity on this. Is that how the decision goes through to the next steps? Or does it end up with school committee and school committee can look at it and say, but we really prefer something else?
No, I think that SBC makes the decision. This subcommittee would fill out this criteria similar to the way we did before and make a recommendation to the SBC, or that they accept the criteria as we have evaluated it. We'll go
Yeah.
through the criteria again with the SBC, similar to how we did it before, where we present it, we talk about it, and then at the end we have a discussion, and then maybe revise it a little bit based on what the SBC says. But whatever the SBC votes on becomes the final project. The school committee, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but the school committee doesn't make that decision, I don't think.
It is the SBC, yeah.
May I, the only thing the school committee need to do is that, which is related to, is that
Yeah.
school committee need to accept the one of the 3 enrollment option.
Yeah.
And redistricting map
And
associated.
the consolidation, right? If there's a consolidation, it needs to accept that.
So that part has to be in parallel to, because right now we still have all 3 options on the table.
Right.
I mean, it's very good here because you guys are all on school building committee.
Right, exactly.
So is the next steps here then, Rob, for people, are you going to clean this up from our comments today? Is that the idea?
Yeah, so I'll integrate and modify this based on the comments that I heard, and I'll send it out to the group, and then you guys, in the meantime, you guys can take another look at, take a look at the weighting, for example, the ones that the multipliers that we've added here, see if it makes sense to change those or keep those. And then you're looking at redistricting and the cost questions.
Yeah, because this weighting way it's done is, obviously it's 1 or 2. I mean, you can double a score in this scenario. It's kind of like there's nothing in between. So you might want to, if we want to do something that does, 1, 2, and 3 weight and not worry. I'm just saying that I think the weighting is important, that you guys look at it and make sure you're comfortable with that structure. It's it's a pretty, you guys can see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, so the idea is not for us, as I believe, the idea is not that necessarily at our next evaluation subcommittee meeting, Chin, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not trying to score this. We're trying to wrap this up to present to the building committee on the 17th, right?
Yes, the 16th, we have the next subcommittee meeting, and then the idea would be the 16th that we come to a recommended evaluation process, basically.
Criteria.
Criteria.
And weighting, yeah.
And then that will be presented on the 17th to be accepted by the full committee.
Which would mimic what we did for the PDP. That's pretty much the same. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then May 27th, this subcommittee would actually go through and score.
Right.
When we have the cost and when we have all the rest of the information, that's correct.
Right. So I think that's an 8 a.m. meeting. I think we should probably budget at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours for that meeting.
Yes.
2.5.
Rob wants 2.5. Who's willing to give Rob 2.5?
Well, it's the most important meeting.
It is. And then you guys, you were very deliberate last time, which is good.
Yeah.
I have a question on just the, Rob, when you presented this from the very beginning, the 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever that column of numbers, is that how you've done it with other school building projects?
This weighting here?
Yeah. The multiplier. I'm just wondering why it's not 1, 2, 3.
It could be any. We've seen it done different ways, and so this was just an idea of trying to make it total 100. So without getting too complicated, it was just shown as an example. So
So what I anticipate happening is that we'll have big gaps between the different options where when we were weighting the options themselves, the numbers were tighter because we were using a tighter scale. So it's going to look different coming out of this process than it looked when we got down to our 6. The scale of the numbers is going to get bigger and the gaps between each option is likely to be
Yeah.
magnified.
Can I make a suggestion? Just, I'm conscious of people's time. Why don't we think about the weighting issue? I agree that the numbers will create a spread. So let's think about that, and maybe on April 16th, come back to the table with thoughts about redistricting, thoughts about the cost benefit analysis section, and thoughts about what numbers we want to use for weighting.
Well, I'm just going to add one thing about that is that, in this phase, you do want a wider spread because, coming forward at the end of the PSR with, 328s, for example, isn't going to work. We need to have one that stands out with the highest number.
That's what you've done in the past, because I know you've had experience with this before, and that's a very reasonable response.
I'm going to give the committee a heads up. Between the Henland Deerfield 560 on the tree versus the backwards E, those two are going to be very, very tight on majority of the items. The only thing that will be different will be a very subtle difference when you come to somewhere in the educational piece, I think, because when it comes to site and town impact and cost and all the other things, they're basically the same.
Right. And that's, I think, to Emily's point earlier of fleshing out why the principals really preferred the tree, that's going to be critical. And so I think we need to really get that.
But I think it also goes to Rob's point about the weighting, right? That you do want to have the weighting sort of amplify the differences, if you will, in a way that it makes it apparent that there's a difference between this one and this one, and that it's not like, a point.
Right. And then these numbers, I set it up this way leading up to 100 because it's easy for someone to think of it as a percentage point,
Yep.
And so when you think of the different categories and how they relate to one another, I like having the total be 100 because it's easy for people to translate that to something that they know. Oh, that's a percentage. Oh, the education's 30% of the total. That's
Yeah. Got it.
Okay.
right.
All right. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. So the last item is an action item. We need to approve the subcommittee minutes from February 6th, 2020.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, I need to do a roll call for this. So Mayor Plotkin votes yes. Ken Aries?
Yes.
John Cummings?
Yes.
Nancy Hyde?
Yes.
Tony, I believe, had to drop off. And Emily Parks?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any new business? No. All right. So our next meeting, as we mentioned, is Thursday, April 16th at 8 a.m. It will be virtual, so we'll be in the same format. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Maya, I'm doing another roll call. Maya votes yes. Ken?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Tony left, and Emily?
Yes.
Okay, motion is carried and
everyone.
the meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank-
Appreciate
All right,
it.
thanks, everyone.
Stay well and healthy.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks,
Stay
Mike.
close and healthy.
Right.
All
Okay,
right.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Jim. Hey, Steve.